Good morning. It's nice to see you again. If you didn't get one coming in, there are 8.5 by 11 sheets with a lot of typing on them at the entrances. Yes. Hi? Raise up high? Good. If you don't have one, it has a lot of information. It has 3 functions. One, it tells you how close the preacher is to being finished. 2, it tells you where he got some of his ideas. And 3, there's material there for further study, books to read and websites to look at and stuff like that. How much time, and so I'm told if you don't have one, just go and get one. I won't think you're walking out or anything. How much time in the average day or week does your job consume? Now, I don't mean what you do to earn money. I mean, for every Jesus follower, your real assignment. I want to think about that with you for the next few minutes. And to make sure it stays not too many, I'll take my watch off right now. That assignment is summarized in Deuteronomy chapter 4 in 3 words: obey, remember, and teach. Now, we've already heard verses 1 to 8. I will still read some of them again, just as I'm moving through point by point. So Deuteronomy begins 40 years after God led Israel out of slavery in Egypt, and shortly before the event in the drama here at Jericho. 40 years since God led Israel through the Red Sea, across the desert, to Mount Sinai, where he entered a covenant with them. A covenant is a long-term agreement, like a marriage. A marriage is a kind of covenant. It's between 2 parties, meaning it's not a one-way thing. So God says, I brought you here, and I'll keep on taking care of you. Here's what I want back. I need you to follow my laws. Why? Well, God's the creator. He knows how we work best. Okay? But there's more. And it was covered in what you heard before, and I'll read some of it again in a minute. The point is that God wanted them to follow the laws that he gave them. Now, in Deuteronomy chapters 1 to 3, Moses summarized what has happened since they left Mount Sinai 40 years ago. Their rebellion, how God took care of them anyway, how God protected them, and now they're here about to enter the promised land. Chapter 4 continues with the instructions. So the first 8 verses that you heard cover the first of the 3 words, obey. Verse 1, again, hear, O Israel, the decrees and laws I'm about to teach you. Follow them so you may live and may go in to take possession of the land. In other words, following God's law is the key to your success. What that means practically for you and me is that Bible reading has to be part of our day or our routine. I checked a website with Bible reading plans, and they said they had over 10,000. Hopefully you can find one there that works if you don't have one. 10,000 is quite a selection. It's much more difficult for the Spirit to guide you with principles that you haven't read or haven't considered. The next one is very interesting, verse 2. Do not add to what I command you, and don't subtract from it, but keep the commands the Lord your God that gives you. That is a very interesting verse because Jesus gets into this in a story in Mark chapter 7 and Matthew 15. He takes on the religious leaders because they've done both. They have added to God's commands, made their own commands, and told the people that it's sin for the people to disobey the commands that they made up that God didn't give. And Jesus says, you can't do that. You're distracting from God's law by making them follow yours. But that's not all. Because Moses says, don't add to them and don't take away from them. He then went after them because when there was a law they didn't like, they would look at each other and say, can we just agree that that doesn't apply to us? They would nod, and then they were all good, right? Because we've agreed as a community it doesn't apply to us. Jesus says, you are messing with the Word of God and the commands of God, and he uses those words, Mark 7 and Matthew 15. We say, hold it. There's laws in Leviticus that make absolutely no sense to me, and I have no idea how to follow them. What do I do with that? Jesus answered that question as well in Mark chapter 7, because in Mark 7, he abolishes an entire category of laws, the laws about food. What you do with those laws is this. We read them through Jesus' eyes, okay? Now, I'll tell you, I started doing this 11 years ago, and I'm still finding more. Jesus talked about a lot of those laws and said what to do with them. The study of what Jesus did with all those laws is more than we have time for today. Suffice to say that there's a decent chance, not a 100% chance, but a decent chance that if there's a law back there in Exodus that makes no sense to you, look to see whether Jesus talked about it. There's a decent chance that he did. And if not, as you continue to read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you may get a sense for how Jesus feels about that kind of law. Okay? But the point is, God's law is very high for Jesus. But a lot of it has changed because he came. We don't sacrifice sheep, for example. Okay? Then verses 3 and 4, Jesus says, remember Baal of Peor. Those of you who didn't disobey are still alive. Baal of Peor is a story in Numbers 25. It's where the people of Israel were seduced, literally, into idolatry. And many people died. Now, it's not because God is insecure. It's following another God is following something that doesn't exist. And it will mislead you from life, and God is the only source of life. So that's the third thing under obey. The fourth is select godly leaders. That's verse 5. Moses says, God told me to teach you the laws. So you need godly leaders, and Crossway Elm Creek does that. You're doing well there. Then fifth, and God is a missionary God. Listen again to verses 6 to 8. Observe them carefully, for it will show your wisdom and understanding to the nations, who will hear about all these decrees and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. What other nation is so great as to have their gods near them, the way the Lord our God is near us whenever we pray to him? And what other nation is so great as to have such righteous decrees and laws as this body of laws I set before you today? You see, God is a missionary God. Back in Genesis 12, when God calls Abraham and Sarah, he says, I'm going to give you children, I'm going to make you a great nation and give you a promised land, and bless the whole world through you. This isn't just about you, Israel. This is about the whole world. God created every person on earth and wants a relationship with all those nations. And God says, as they look at you following my laws, which are different than theirs, because theirs didn't come from the Creator, they're going to say, hey, those laws make more sense than ours. Example, in those days, unless you were really rich, you worked 365 days a year, except in leap year. Then it was 366. And along come the 10 Commandments with a day off every 7 for everyone, including the animals. You'll see reference in the outline to a study done about 40 years ago at a university in, I think, Arizona, that found out that the human body functions on a 7-day cycle with a need for a day off every week. Well, go figure. How did God know that? Well, that's easy. He made us, right? So, of course, you're going to work better. You're going to have a more productive society. You're going to get more work out of your servants, out of your animals, if they have a rest. That's how you're made. That's just one example. We can't get into more. But God intended his laws to be a form of evangelism as people saw the way Israel lived together. There. Word number 2, remember. Here, the text is only half of a verse, 9. Only be careful and watch yourselves closely. This is going to take work. So that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen, or let them slip from your heart as long as you live. Do you journal? How do you remember? There are 3 ways to remember that I can think of. If you have a fourth, I want to hear it. Write it down. Take a picture of it. Keep on repeating it, memorizing. Those are the 3 ways that I can think of. How do you remember? Or do you just forget and keep on living your life day by day? I was happy to hear that story of the happy 48 hours you had. I hope somebody writes it down. My mother started recording her family story when she was 60. She dictated it onto 5 cassettes, and my sister-in-law typed them up, 34 pages, single-space, 9 or 10 fonts. My dad recorded his family's. My mom's story she took back to 1900, so about 85 years. My dad recorded his story also at about the age of 60. He went back to about 1920. And then he did sequels at ages 63, 65, 80, and the final one was 2 months before he died at 86. All were recorded so that we have them. The story of the family, the story of God's faithfulness, of God's power, of how he had seen God work, what happened in the family. And we have that because my father wrote it down. My aunt, not everybody's a writer or a talker. She was our family videographer. We have home movies back to the mid-50s in color and lots of slides. When we got together, we'd have a slideshow with Aunt Irene. That was how she recorded stuff. I started writing, coincidentally, also at the age of 60, but that was simply a form of grieving. My mom had passed away, and I started to write stories. And I continue to do that. How do you remember? The third word, and here we're going to read for a little bit, because we got about 30 verses to read. Starting in the middle of verse 9, teach. Who do you teach? I didn't know, and I was a pastor for over 23 years, and I didn't know until about a year ago that there is an explicit command to grandparents. Did you know that? I didn't know that. Well, guess what? If you think that the job of a grandparent is to spoil while the parents raise, you're flat wrong. The spoil thing you work out. But listen to this. This passage talks about grandparents teaching and about what they're supposed to teach. Oh, not just grandparents, parents too. And if you're not a parent or a grandparent, this applies to you too, because remember, Moses is talking to leaders in verse 5. Okay, and we are a church that reads the scriptures to say the priesthood of all believers, meaning if you're here and you're a Jesus follower, you're a leader. Okay? And I'll talk more about my aunts and uncles. Here we go. Teach them, that is the commands of God, to your children and what you have seen. Teach them to your children and to their children after them. Okay? Remember the day you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, that is Sinai, when he said to me, assemble the people before me to hear my words, so they may learn to revere me as long as they live in the land and may teach them to their children. You came near and stood at the foot of the mountain while it blazed with fire to the very heavens with black clouds and deep darkness. Then the Lord spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of words but saw no form. There was only a voice. He declared to you his covenant, the 10 Commandments, which he commanded you to follow, and then wrote them on 2 stone tablets. And the Lord directed me at that time to teach you the decrees and laws you are to follow in the land you're crossing the Jordan to possess. You saw no form of any kind the day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire. Therefore, watch yourselves very carefully so that you do not become corrupt and make for yourselves an idol, an image of any shape, whether formed like a man or a woman or like an animal on earth or any bird or any creature that moves along the ground or any fish. And when you look up to the sky and see the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the heavenly array, do not be enticed into bowing down to them and worshiping things the Lord your God has given to all the nations under heaven. But as for you, the Lord took you and brought you out of the iron-smelting furnace, out of Egypt, to the people of his inheritance, as you now are. The Lord was angry with me because of you, and he solemnly swore that I would not cross the Jordan and enter the good land the Lord your God is giving you. I will die in this land, I will not cross the Jordan, but you are to cross over and take possession of that good land. Be careful not to forget the covenant of the Lord your God that he made with you. Do not make for yourselves an idol in the form of anything the Lord your God has forbidden, for the Lord your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God. After you have had children and grandchildren and have lived in the land a long time, if you then become corrupt and then make any kind of idol, doing evil in the eyes of the Lord your God and provoking him to anger, I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you that you will quickly perish from the land you're crossing the Jordan to possess. You will not live there long, but will certainly be destroyed. The Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and only a few of you will survive among the nations to which the Lord your God will drive you. There you'll worship man-made gods of wood and stone which can't see, hear, eat, or smell. But if from there you seek the Lord your God, you'll find him if you look for him with all your heart and all your soul. When you're in distress and all these things have happened to you, then in later days you'll return to the Lord your God and obey him. For the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not abandon or destroy you or forget the covenant with your forefathers, which he confirmed by oath. Ask now about the former days, long before your time, from the day God created man on the earth. Ask from one end of the heavens to the other, has anything so great as this ever happened, or has anything like this ever been heard of? Has any other God heard the voice of God speaking out of fire as you haven't lived? Has any God ever tried to take for himself one nation out of another by testings, miraculous signs and wonders, by war, a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, or by great and awesome deeds, like all the things the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? You were shown these things so that you might know that the Lord is God. Beside him there is no other. From heaven he made you to hear his voice, to discipline you. On earth he showed you his great fire, and you heard his words from out of the fire. Because he loved your forefathers and chose their descendants after them, he brought you out of Egypt by his presence and his great strength, to drive out before you nations greater and stronger than you, and to bring you into their land, to give it to you as for your inheritance. Teach your grandchildren and your children. My Aunt Irene, all those photographs, she had 23 nephews and nieces, 7 siblings, and she gave each of them a binder of photographs of themselves and their families. 23 plus 7 is 30, with an embroidered cover. She was a craftsy person. That was how she passed along the photo history of our family to her family. She had no living children of her own. Her nephews and nieces were her kids. She made a DVD of the home movies, and I have that. Those memoirs that my mother wrote and my father wrote when they were 60, I put them on my shelf. I was 32 at the time. I had recently started a new business that was consuming way too much of my time. I was moderator of our local Mennonite Brethren Church in Southern Ontario. And I didn't find the brain space to read those memoirs until I was 60, 28 years later. But the fact is that when I was ready to read them, they were there. My daughter digitized them when I sent them to my cousins. Now, when my mother passed them out, she got 2 responses. You got this date wrong, you got that date wrong. Second response was disinterest. But when I passed them out 28 years later, I got back, thanks, Marvin, this is great reading. The benefit of writing it down. One lady in Donwood Manor, I was talking about this, and they were talking afterwards about the fact that you write stuff down, but it doesn't mean anyone cares. She said, I gave it to my kids, and I think I wrote on the first page, before you throw this out, please read it. Good one. Fact is, I have all my parents' memoirs because my parents recorded them. Just talking may not be as effective, although it is important. My brother remembers that our grandfather said to him one day, now we're going to tell stories, and he sat my brother down, and he talked about the injustices that our family perpetrated on the Ukrainian peasants. He said it wasn't right. So I tried to pump my brother for more information, and he said, unfortunately, I wasn't in a very good space to receive it right then, so I really can't tell you any more of what our grandpa said. And so he regrets it deeply, and of course so do I, because that's information that's lost. I never had the privilege of that invitation from our grandfather. Recording it, talking it, whatever. Like now that after my parents passed away, I started to pump my mom's younger sister. I'd call her every couple of weeks, find out how she was. We'd talk about all kinds of stuff, and then I'd ask her history questions. After we hung up, I'd type it up. And Irene's been gone now the last 3 years. I got her stories. And now all I got left is my dad's youngest sister, who's 86, and my mom's youngest brother, who's 82. And I correspond with them, and I get stories, and I keep them. And the files are growing. More and more stories that my parents never told me. And I'm grateful to my aunts and uncles for the stories they're telling me of our family and of God's faithfulness. So what do you tell? 8 things. 8 things here that you tell in this chapter. And the outline will remind you of them. The first, Moses says, remember how you stood at Mount Sinai and you saw the smoke and you heard God dictate to you the 10 Commandments. How does that translate? The day you met Jesus. You know, until I was reading this passage, it never occurred to me within the last year that, as far as I can tell, I had never told my children, never mind my grandkids, the story of when I invited Jesus into my life at the age of 9. Isn't that amazing? Goodness. Well, I fixed that in February when we were together, and I told my kids and grandkids the story. That's the first thing. Second thing is teach them God's laws. That's verses 10 to 14. Well, that's easy, because one thing I didn't tell you before is what I do with all those stories of my parents. We get together as a family for a long weekend once a year. And when we get together as a family, I have appointed myself, without asking anybody, as the dinner music. Now, I know I only got about 7 or 8 minutes from when the kids have their plates full until they're up and moving and talking. You know, I grew up on a farm, and I observed early on as a parent, I noticed as a child, now we had these metal augers, and when they were empty, they chattered like crazy. But when they were full of grain, they were quiet. So I said, kids are like an auger. You know, when they're feeding their face, they're quiet. The rest of the time, they're noisy. Of course, that's true for adults, too. Anyways, I only got about 8 minutes that the auger's quiet. And I use it to tell a story. of God's faithfulness, usually one that I got from my parents' memoirs. God's law, you think about it. What biblical principle is illustrated here? Read the verses. There you got it. Third, tell them the consequences of failing to follow God's way. That comes up twice here. One, Moses isn't going to be able to go into the promised land, and Moses predicts that they're going to be disobedient, and he tells them the consequences. Do you have a story of disobedience and consequences? Put it to use. Make it a teachable moment. 3. Now 4. The story of God, how God took care of you while you were experiencing his discipline. All those 40 years that they were wandering in the wilderness because they rebelled against God, God still sent a manna every day, water every day, pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night, military protection. Their shoes didn't wear out, their clothes didn't wear out. All the benefits were there while they were experiencing discipline. Do you have a story like that? How God took care of you as he was disciplining you? 5. This verse again is very important. It's about, let me just get the right reference here. Here it is, the iron smelting pot, verse 20. As for you, the Lord took you and brought you out of the iron smelting furnace out of Egypt to be his people of inheritance. Not all hard times are because of sin. We know that. God allows hardships into our lives to teach us, to mold us. Do you have a story of going through hard times and about how God used those hard times to make you grow? You've got a story. Number 5. And then number 6, verse 34. Has any of God ever tried to take for himself one nation out of another by miraculous signs and by outstretched arms or great and awesome deeds? The stories of how God took care of you as he took care of this young man here in that biking accident. Do you have a story of how God took care of you? Maybe I've just got some really poor judgment, but I have just an awful lot of them. It was 1998. We were on our way back to Manitoba from visiting my family during March break. We were on the interstate, having crossed over at Detroit. The interstate 70-mile-an-hour speed limit, which is about 115 kilometers an hour. It was late morning. The pavement was dry. I was in the passing lane, passing a big semi-truck. My eyes were firmly fixed on the road because that's how I pass semi-trucks. You know what I mean? And as we're beside that semi, suddenly, so there's Edith and our 4 kids and me, our 4 kids who are adolescent, young teen. Suddenly, under the right front corner of the minivan, there is a hammering, an explosion, and a cloud of blue smoke. Now, when you're beside a semi at the 70 miles an hour in the passing lane, what's the smart thing to do? Slow down, pull in behind the truck and pull over and stop, right? You know what I did? Nothing. Because I felt nothing. After that hammering, I felt nothing. The van felt fine. I kept going, finished passing that semi, then slowed down and stopped. Got out, walked around that van, and I saw a completely destroyed tire. The tread was wrapped around the axle, the sidewalls basically gone. And the rear tire half flat. You remember, I said I had my eyes on the road. I'm passing a semi. I wasn't looking at the landscape. I have no idea what happened. So why did I not feel anything? I have only one theory. I think an angel kept up the front of that van. If you got another idea, I'm happy to hear it. So there we are by the side of the road. A couple hundred meters away is a rest stop. How often are they on the interstates? Every 50 miles, 100 miles, whatever. There ain't every mile. So I walk over. We didn't have cell phone. 1998, okay? I walk over to the payphone, and I call AAA, which is CAA in the U.S. Call for a tow. Now, I know there's a problem because tow trucks in 1998 did not come with four-door cabs, usually. So I go back, and it wasn't long, and a police car showed up. No, it's K-9 unit, that ain't gonna work. But he called one of his co-workers, and another police car quickly came, and I knew we had transportation. The flat deck, 2 flat tires, was there quite quickly. We got loaded and taken to a tire store. Now, the van was almost new. It was a 96 van, and this was 98. But even though it was a fairly new van, the tire store had tires to fit. I think it was about 2 hours and we were on the road. I got home, I took the van to the local garage and said, can you just check it over to see if everything's okay? Well, it wasn't. Like stuff was bent in the steering linkage from that tire exploding. And I learned something I didn't know, that there's a heavy plastic wheel well lining inside the wheel well, which was smashed. There was a piece of it, just hanging on by a shard. I said to my mechanic, I want that. Took it home. I gave it to my father-in-law, who's a woodworker. I said, can you make a plaque for me? Since that day, in 1998, this hangs in our garage. You get in the car, you're going to see it. When you are out there, you are in God's hands. God took care of us in 1998. And this is the reminder. And my grandchildren now know why that thing hangs at the front of the garage above the deep freeze. I realized they'd seen that thing in the garage for all the years of their lives, and I'd never told them why it's there. Well, I told them when we were together this last February, inspired by Deuteronomy 4. Two more. Teach them the promises for the future. These words are so beautiful. You'll recognize some of them from Jeremiah chapter 29. Listen to this. When you fall away, and then you come back, if from there you seek the Lord, verse 29, that's where we are. If from there, from exile, you seek the Lord your God, you will find him if you look for him with all your heart and all your soul, right? That's Jeremiah 29:13. When you're in distress and all these things have happened to you, then in later life, you will return to the Lord your God and obey him. For the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not abandon or destroy you or forget the covenant with your forefathers, which he confirmed by oath. What does that remind you of? The prodigal son, Luke 15. What Moses is basically saying is what Jesus said 1,500 years later. When in that far country you're tired of taking care of pigs, you just come on back, and the Father will be waiting, and he'll run toward you with his open arms and throw his arms around you and say, let's have a celebration. Kill the fatted calf. My son, my daughter has come home. The seventh thing you have to tell your kids and grandkids is, no matter how far you go, God is always waiting for you to come back. Just come back. He's waiting for you. He loves you. And then the last one. Verse 37, because he loved your forefathers and chose their descendants after them, he brought you out of Egypt. He loves you. And here we come to the gospel. The good news about Jesus, that God loves you so much that he became a human and died voluntarily to take our place, took our sins so that we could be adopted as God's children. The Creator God loves you that much. No matter what you've done, he'll take you back. Just come back. If you're not a Jesus follower, this is a very good day to become a Jesus follower. There are people here who would be happy to pray with you. And if you are a Jesus follower, remember, obey, remember, teach. I wonder how God wants to change people's lives through your story, through your family's story, and through the story of Crossway, Elm Creek.